we've had many conversations before, but we wanted today to focus some of the key aspects of your vision for culture, of your vision for art. And I think there are wonderful transitions, as always at DLD, to the previous talk when Steffi talked about making imagination into reality, because this is very much what you've been doing in such an exemplary way with film, with fashion, with visual arts, with dance, with music, and also with architecture, bringing people together. It's wonderful that philosopher Roman Kaczarnik is here with us, because Roman has written amazing books about the necessity of going beyond the short-termism of our world and to basically find long-durational, long-term visions. And that is very much what your work is all about. And I thought we could maybe begin with this, because I wanted to ask you, what's the overarching vision really guiding the establishment of museums in Qatar? Because it is basically a plan of many, many years.
Thank you, Hans. I'm very happy to be back in Munich. It's a great city to be inspired by imagination. And thank you, Steffi, for the warm welcome and for everybody for being here. It's not my vision, it's our national vision of Qatar, which was established in 2008 by my father, His Highness the Father Emir, and continues on with my brother. I've had the great privilege of developing it, leading it, shaping it. And yesterday at dinner, I was sitting next to your Minister of Science and Arts, and he said, we've been very lucky in Munich because our party has been here for very, very long. So we've had consistency. And I thought that's exactly how we are, because I've been in this position for half my life, 20 years, and we've had a long-term vision and consistent one that is under the national vision of Qatar 2030, which was always about investing in culture as a means of developing human development. You know, our strategy was always about how do we develop our petrochemical economy into a knowledge-based economy, which is why we initiated the culture vision, starting with the Museum of Islamic Art, opening in 2008, then followed by Methaf, which is our Arab Museum of Modern Art, which Lina Gotme is actually expanding now into a larger campus. She's also the architect for the Venice Biennale Qatar National Pavilion, which we're all very excited about. And we opened the National Museum of Qatar, which is a Desert Rose Museum of Jean Nouvel. So that was the first chapter of our 25-year vision, which focused on heritage, religion, and culture. That was very, very important. As much as we wanted to be relevant and modern, we wanted also to be rooted in our tradition and our heritage. The second chapter, which we're almost completing with the opening of the Sports and Olympic Museum, which we opened when we hosted the FIFA World Cup, the best World Cup in the world, in 2022. And the Children's Museum, which is under, and we've opened our gardens, and now we're tendering the building, which we hopefully will have open by 2029. It's designed by UN Studios. And the final chapter of this 25-year plan was global connections, which focuses on 3 very different projects: a car museum designed by Rem Koolhaas, Lusail Museum, which actually sits on a whole island, Al Maha Island in Lusail, which is our future city, a whole island designed by Herzog de Meuron, one of the few places in Qatar where foreigners can own property. So for those of you looking for a secondary home, this is an island where you get the Herzog de Meuron house. And last is the art mill, which is our current and only flour mill that we will convert into a museum of modern and contemporary art designed by Alejandro Aravena, Elemental. So that was really, that was our vision, and to support the museums, because we didn't only want to have collections and beautiful architectural building. It was all about developing knowledge and human capacity and talent. I'm proud to say today Qatar is probably one of the most important hubs for talent of our region. People know that if they come to Qatar, they'll find facilities, they'll find infrastructure, mentorship, and grants to develop their talent. We built platforms for creative hubs. You mentioned film. We have the Doha Film Institute. We have the fire station, which used to be our civil defense building. That's now an art school run by Wa'el Shouki, who's also the artistic director for Art Basel. We have M7, which is an incubation for fashion design technology, and Liwan for design. We also have platforms like Tasweer for photography, Design Doha. For those of you who haven't come to Doha, I encourage you to visit in April, where we have our Design Doha Biennale opening on April 12th. That's a platform for all the designers from our region to show off their talent. And a lot of people from the industry come and work with them in their new projects, especially in the region. So that's pretty much our strategy and our plan. It feels like it's a lot, but at the same time, we feel like there's a lot more to be done. As you know, I can see now the Fischli and Weiss piece that we actually bought before it was installed at the Serpentine. We do a lot of public art, and then you have the Richard Serra East-West, West-East. At his memorial, 4 people spoke, and 3 of them said that this was his most important piece. So, we try to bring communities and the world together using arts and culture really as a bridge to, foster dialogue and respect and tolerance amongst people.
You mentioned the fire station, which is a school for future generations of artists, and you mentioned Wael Shaki, an artist whom we also showed at Serpentine, an amazing Egyptian artist. And I think one thing which is really important is the way you empower artists. You give actually artists important roles in your planning. And Wael Shaki is not only the director of this art school, because as you mentioned, he's also the artistic director of Art Basel Qatar, which is going to happen for the first time in February. So I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about your decision to entrust artists with such central institutional roles. It's something which actually John Latham and Barbara Stabini said in the 60s. In the UK, they said one has to basically bring art into society and give artists, positions in society, which is what you're doing. And then maybe more broadly, it could be interesting to hear, as it's just about to happen, about Art Basel Qatar, and also what role you see for a major international art fair to play for cultural diplomacy.
So the fire station was an artist studio. We had studios that we made available for artists, and we opened in 2015. And 10 years later, after securing the land in the Giardini for our national pavilion, I decided that we needed to really build a school that develops artists from our region to be represented at the National Pavilion of Qatar. Because when we spoke to the Italians, they realized that the Arab voice was absent. There was no Arab pavilion in the Giardini, with the exception of Egypt, which one could say is also an African country. And so we felt it was very important for us to be there, but also to show the best art from our region. And to do that, we had to develop the talent. So I had a conversation with Wael. We've been having conversations for years. This didn't just happen overnight. And we felt that this was the right time to transform the fire station from studios to a school, attracting artists from basically the global south. So that was what happened with the fire. I'm very inspired by the Black Mountain School, and I'm trying to develop something of equivalent but relevant to our region, also with the QPSD, where actually we're hosting the Art Basel opening dinner for all of you who are planning to come. We'll see you there. And that's going to be a school where we have different departments, from photography to fashion to art, different forms of creativity, but led by artists. Because they know what artists need to learn. They know the kind of infrastructure we need to develop in order to formulate a curriculum that is very much aligned with what we need artists to know today. With regards to the art fair, that was completely an independent decision from us. We are a non-profit organization. We are a culture partner to Art Basel Qatar. I think it's a very exciting moment. This year, we are celebrating 20 years of the Qatar Museums and 50 years of the National Museum under the umbrella of Evolution Nation. And when my brother, His Highness the Emir, decided to bring an art fair, he chose Art Basel Qatar, we felt it was the right moment to connect the industry to our talent, because we have a surplus of talent now based in Qatar. They feel very welcome, very safe. They can produce whatever kind of art they want in exhibitions, and are, as you say, Hans, quite empowered to do, the sky is the limit really for them. So we feel like the art fair is coming at a very timely moment where we can connect talent to industry and hopefully have a more active private sector in our region where more and more galleries can open so that we can take talent from our region to the world.
Thank you so much. You already mentioned Lina Gottme and the pavilion in Venice, and this is a very special project where basically a new pavilion will happen in the Giardini. This is very, very rare. And you appointed with Lina Gottme a young architect who basically is going to build this permanent pavilion. Maybe we can talk about this a little bit more. It's a very significant moment, I think, for Qatar and for the region, this pavilion. Maybe you could tell us what were the guiding ideas shaping this initiative and for the selection of Lina Gottme. Because obviously you work with artists like Weil, but you also work very, very closely with architects.
Yes, I mean, architecture and art, I mean, we do have a very active program with architecture, and also if you see all the art museums that we built, I mean, IMP was a retired architect when my father convinced him to come out of retirement. We had already done a competition, an architect had been selected, but his ambition was to have the best of the best, and he wanted architecture to balance the quality of the collection that was being collected over the decades. So when we looked at, you know, in the beginning, when we started this journey of investing in culture, we had to appoint an architect. It was very difficult to convince an architect to come and build in Qatar because there was nothing there. Today, the landscape has completely changed. The art mill is an example where we opened it to a competition. We had over 460 architects apply. We shortlisted it to 25, and then we had Elemental as our final. So with Lina Gottme as the architect for Venice, the approach was quite simple. It was the first Arab pavilion in the Giardini. We spent years working on securing a plot. Never in my dreams would I thought I would get one of the most strategic plots in the Giardini, but that's just to show that there was very little land in the Giardini, and for the last 50 years, there was no new pavilions. So we had the criteria of selecting architects from our part of the world, including the Global South. Many of them happened to be women, and you were on our jury of the Venice pavilion. And that was really the only criteria for us. I did not want to bring the most famous or most award-recognized architect because that's the easiest and shortcut to do. We wanted to bring an architect from our region. That was really the main criteria, that Qatar is becoming the platform to support Arab talent in all these disciplines. And the jury voted, and she was a selected winner. And I'm very happy because since then, she's been awarded the British Museum expansion, which is also a great recognition for an Arab architect.
Another project, for those of you who can't go in February to Qatar, is going to be in November when the Quadrennial will open. And there is an interesting connection there to Germany, which I think would be worthwhile to explore. Because of course we have now, I mean, when I started to curate in the 90s, there were maybe 20, 30 biennials, and I think now there are more, far more than 100. It's going towards 200 biennials in the world. So there's a real polyphony of biennials, but you decided not to do a biennial, but to follow a different rhythm. We are back here to Roman Kajanik and la longue durée, the long duration, as Brodel also would have said. And you were inspired actually by the German model of Documenta, which doesn't happen every 2 years, but which has a longer kind of, a longer time frame. Can you tell us about the Quadrennial? It's going to be curated by a curatorial team. Yes. I think Tom Eckert is involved, Mark Rappold, Ruba Katrib, it's a whole team.
Exactly, it's a whole team of curators. But thank you for mentioning Documenta, because I'm a long-term planner because we have a long-term vision. Our country, a lot of times people will say, oh, Qatar is just a rich country. But no, actually we were a very poor country not too long ago. But we took the bold vision, my father transformed the whole economy by gambling. They called him the gambler with LNG, but today it is the most important source of energy. And so when we thought about what is our legacy for the World Cup, somebody mentioned the years of culture as one of our legacy, and we wanted to remind ourselves of how sports and culture came together to create a whole new lifestyle for our young generation to live a quality of life, one that is, full of knowledge, respect, and tolerance, and so forth. So I had long read about Documenta and had visited it the last version, not the one, I mean, the one before, the 10 years ago. And I was very inspired by the whole idea of how Documenta was created to put pressure on communist Germany. And, I love the Cold War. That was probably one of my favorite history periods to read about. And so I was very inspired by that idea, believe it or not. And actually, when we had our culture with Germany, it was in 2017, the first foreign minister to visit Qatar was Sigmund Gabriel, the German foreign minister. And we had such great projects that year, but for me, the one that I will always remember is when I asked him to give me pieces of the Berlin Wall. And he said, "Why do you want pieces of the Berlin Wall?" I said, "Well, we're experiencing a blockade, not very different from your Berlin Wall many decades ago. And I think that would be a token of friendship because you're the first foreign minister to come to Qatar." And so he gave me two options to choose from. I said, "But I like both." He said, "You can have both." So we have one now installed at our National Library that Ram Koolhaas has designed. Another one is Georgetown. But going back to the Quadrennial is going to open in November 20th as a reminder for our World Cup, which was opened 4 years ago, November 20th, 2022. And I think what you're referring to with Germany is we're also unveiling our pavilion with Gerhard Richter, which is a project that we've been working on for maybe 10 years. I think that's how long it took us to finalize that project. And again, it's a token of friendship and reminder between the two countries, but also Gerhard is has an amazing retrospective at the moment at the LVMH Foundation. Somebody mentioned yesterday, I think, that they have a piece there on loan. So that's the quadrennial that we're doing is called Ruba'iyya, which means four in Arabic. It has 60 artists from the global south from over 30 countries. And I hope you come. If you can't come to Art Basel in February or Design Doha in April, do come for the Quadrennial. You'll be learning a lot about artists, and the main central theme is unruly waters, and it talks about trade and Qatar's connection to the Silk Road.
And of course, because there is more time, there is time for commissions. And I think what is particularly interesting with the Quadrennial is that so many artists will actually do new work, that it's not the circuit where we always see the same works, but there's going to be mostly new work, especially commissioned. I want to know more about the Gerhard Richter project, because I had the pleasure of introducing you to Gerhard. Maybe it was 10 years ago, and then there was this legendary trip Gerhard made to Qatar to actually visit the country. And out of that grew a kind of a Gesamtkunstwerk, a pavilion with paintings. It's also architecture. It's a collaboration with a German-American architect, Annabel Seldorf. Could you tell us more about this project and how it's gonna happen?
Well, I think you described it very well. We don't often unveil too much before the moment so that you can be encouraged and motivated to come. But just simply going to the larger narrative of public art, from the very beginning, as there was an image here of the Richard Serra 7 at the park of the Museum of Islamic Art. But from the very beginning, we wanted to take art to the public. And my father asked us to put art in the airport. So we have the Urs Fischer bear, which a lot of you, if you flew through Hamad International Airport, you probably have taken a selfie because it's become the most iconic artwork at the airport. And so that was really the philosophy, and that's why a quadrennial made a lot of sense, because to do good art takes time. And for us, we like to have conversations with the artists. We don't like to impose an idea. It's really, we have the Oliver Ellison piece, for example, in the desert. That was a 7-year conversation that we had with Oliver. Gerhard Richter, it's a 10-year project. So good things take time, and we have the patience and the long-term vision and strategy to be patient so that the results speak for themselves. And then when people come and experience our cultural investments, they know it wasn't just about having something. It was about having something good and going from good to great.
Maybe another example, and that big round of applause. Maybe, I think we have a few more minutes. And another example, I think, which is interesting, is, both Pennone and Nouvelle are kind of examples of artists and architects really connecting to the local context, because we collaborated together with the Serpentine and you on the Giuseppe Benone show, and Benone came to London to the Serpentine and was inspired by the trees, by the park in Kensington Gardens. And it's something which is really, in a way, an exhibition connected to plants and trees. And then realized that, of course, in Qatar, it's not so much about trees, but more about the mineral kind of connection, which will lead to a very different kind of show there, actually next to the Jean Nouvel Museum. And of course, the Jean Nouvel Museum is another example how an architect really connects to the local context. So maybe it's interesting to talk a little bit about that, because it's both global and local.
Thank you. Actually, the Jean Nouvel is a very interesting story, because when we decided, the National Museum, as I said, is celebrating 50 years. It was the first museum in the Gulf that my grandfather opened in 1975. And so when my father decided to expand the National Museum of Qatar, he wanted to find a geological sediment that belongs to us, an identity. You know, the identity part was very, very important. So he asked Jean Nouvel to take a helicopter. He organized a helicopter ride for him to visit all parts of the country. I mean, Qatar is not very big, but he wanted him to have the bird's eye view and also to just really experience Qatar in an unusual way, let's say. And Jean Nouvel found the desert rose and translated that into an architectural statement. And I remember when I was put in charge of the museums, Jean Nouvel presented a different project to us. It was an underground museum with the palace, because the National Museum has the palace of Sheikh Abdullah bin Jassim, which is a son of the founder of Qatar, which was at that time a place for government. That's where people went to meet the leader, that's where they had their meetings, etc., and that's been preserved. So I said to Jean Nouvel, this is so claustrophobic, why are we underground? And he said, well, I'm going to bring you the project I initially had a few years ago, but we didn't have the technology to be able to do it, but today we do. And when he presented that idea, everybody was blown away, you know, of how this geological sediment that's found in the desert, for us nomadic tribes, when we find it, we know that there is water, so it's also a connection and a means for survival, has now been translated into this architectural project, which we call the National Museum of Qatar's Desert Rose. And yeah, so it's iconic. Some people prefer the Museum of Islamic Art, which is Islamic architecture translated by Mr. Pei. Others love the Desert Rose. You know, it's a matter of taste in the end. And with regards to Benoni, we do have an exhibition opening in the fall, and he came up also, he translated his idea, thinking about Qatar and the nature and the geology that's so different to London or the Serpentine's pavilion where he had his show. And he's, I mean, you're curating the show with him. I should ask you the question, but I think he's creating boxes in the park where he will be interpreting different elements of nature into that experience for the visitors coming to the show.
And a miracle has happened, because we were out of time, but I think we were given a few more minutes, because suddenly the clock jumped up again, and we have another last question I can ask you. And I did actually have an urgent question for which originally we didn't have time, which is the question of, you know, libraries and knowledge and archive. And of course, another amazing building is the Library of Rem Koolhaas, which you commissioned. And I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about this connection to archive, because we live in an age where we have more and more, you know, digital information. It's an exponential explosion of information, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have more memory. Amnesia can be somewhere very much at the core of this digital age. And so in a way, memory is relevant. The historian Eric Hobsbawm talked about the protest against forgetting, and that is very important in your plan. Can we talk about, yeah, maybe the building of the library and kind of archives in general?
So the building, the National Library of Qatar has also a very interesting trajectory, because when I started my work, I found out that we were building a national library with Arata Suzaki and a central library in the middle of Education City, which to me is one of the best architectural experiences one can have. So many great architecture. It's, you know, there are universities, schools, so the ecosystem there is vibrant and alive. And so we had decided that rather than have two libraries in the age of the digital age, is to combine the idea. So Arata Suzaki's building hasn't been built, but actually during Art Basel, we're unveiling a model of the architecture by an artist, Pakistani English artist, Sheikha Dawood, as part of the Art Basel activation. So the simple formation of combining a student central library with a national library made the experience very, very different. Unlike most national libraries where when you go, you know, the books are on the shelves and there's not much activity, here it's a vibrant space. The library is open 24 hours for students because it's within education city. You have a cafe, a bookstore. It's a place where books are not kept as pieces of antiquity, but are pretty much alive and inviting people to research and discover. And when I started working on the National Museum, the most important thing for us was to collect information, and most of the information on our past, because the National Museum is a story of the past, the present, and the future. We found it mainly in oral histories and very little archival material. That made us realize the importance of collecting archives to be available to future generations, because what we think is new and irrelevant today becomes so significant in 50, 100 years' time. So we do have archives in our collections, and we hope to continue to collect it, to preserve it really, because most people who have archival material, whether they're artists, curators, architects, collectors, they often don't know what to do with it. So when we take it, we digitize it, we make it available to the world, whether in the Arab world or internationally, and it becomes an irreplaceable resource for knowledge.
There could not be a better conclusion. The future sometimes is invented with the past. Thank you so much. And please give a very big round of applause to Her Excellency Sheikha Al Mayassa.